Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin this morning with the latest developments out of the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has held a series of meetings planning the next attack on Iran. That's after a Hezbollah drone exploded next to his private home. We get more from Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes in the Middle East.
The timeline, to be clear, I think is still unclear, but that series of meetings over the weekend does suggest that it's firmly back on the agenda in those security circles. There were some leaks over the weekend from the US side suggesting that drones would be involved. That would tally with the last sort of back and forth earlier this year in April when Israel is thought to have used drones to target Iranian radar facility. And then the only other line out over the weekend was the Iranian foreign minister calling any potential attack from Israel against Iran a red line and promising to reply in kind. So both sides keeping up the rhetoric, but it does remain to be seen sort of when exactly it will take place.
Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes says Israel's killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was viewed by many as a potential turning point. But in the days since, combat has intensified with Hezbollah and Hamas.
Now to the latest in the presidential race, Nathan. With 15 days until the election, former President Donald Trump held a town hall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He addressed a new line of attack from Vice President Kamala Harris that is getting tired on the campaign trail.
I've done cognitive tests. I've done them twice, and I aced both of them. And the doctor in one case said, I've never seen anybody ace them. They've never seen anybody ace them. But I'd like to see cognitive tests for anybody running for president or vice president.
Later today, Trump will hold a rally in Greenville, North Carolina, after heavily criticizing the Biden administration's response to Hurricane Helene. He has a series of splashy media events planned in the campaign's final days, including a rally at Madison Square Garden this Sunday.
Well, meanwhile, Karen, Vice President Harris visited a black church in Stonecrest, Georgia on Sunday and gave an interview to the Reverend Al Sharpton on MSNBC. She was asked about the former president's, quote, street talk on the campaign and use of vulgar language to describe her record as vice president.
The president of the United States must set a standard, not only for our nation, but understanding the standard that we as a nation must set for the world.
Kamala Harris predicted Trump's lack of decorum would be a disqualifier with voters. New federal campaign finance filings show the Harris campaign raised $221.8 million in September. That's more than 3 times the $62.7 million raised by the Trump campaign. The latest Real Clear Politics average of national polls shows the race still neck and neck, with Harris leading Trump by just 0.9%.
When we turn to the markets now, Nathan, and Wall Street gets back to work with stocks in record territory. In fact, the S&P 500 is coming off its 47th record close of the year. Kamal Bhatia, President and CEO of Principal Asset Management.
Look, I think the markets have very powerful momentum right now, not just here, but also other parts of the world. So I do think the market conditions are perfect for equities to do well here, although the valuations are getting rich.
Principal Asset Management's Kamal Bhatia notes the S&P 500 has risen for 6 straight weeks.
And while that's raised concerns over valuations, Karen, Muddy Waters Capital founder Carson Block says most investors would now do better to just buy the biggest U.S. stocks.
There's a Fed put. There's always a Fed put. You know, does there come a point in time when the system breaks and the Fed can't fix it? Theoretically, yes. In our lifetimes, I don't know. So I think for now, it probably just pays not to think too much, just close your eyes and buy, probably Mag 7.
Muddy Waters Capital founder Carson Block also tells Bloomberg the China stock market is uninvestable.
Well, Nathan, the parade of earnings continues with a number of high-profile companies reporting this week, including several Dow members. We get a preview with Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
We'll be getting earnings reports this week from AT&T, Boeing, and Coca-Cola amid questions about whether the outlook for corporate profits justifies current valuations. Quincy Crosby is Chief Global Strategist at LPL Financial.
This is a market that really is discerning and will punish any slight hint in the guidance that doesn't meet ultimately the valuations.
Also reporting this week, GE, Tesla, American Airlines, and Southwest Airlines. We'll also hear from UPS and Norfolk Southern. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Charlie, thank you. The S&P 500's decade of big gains is about to come to an end. That is according to strategists at Goldman Sachs. They say U.S. stocks are unlikely to sustain their above-average performance as investors turn to other assets, including bonds, for better returns. Goldman predicts the S&P will post an annualized nominal total return of just 3% over the next 10 years. That compares with 13% in the last decade and a long-term average of 11%.
Well, Nathan and Company news, shares of Boeing up almost 4% this morning. The plane maker and the union representing 33,000 striking members hammered out a tentative new accord that notches up pay by 35% over 4 years. But the hourly workers had the final say with their vote on Wednesday, and approval is far from certain. They overwhelmingly rejected a deal in September.
Look for a jump in Treasury yields, Karen. That's the call out of T. Rowe Price. The firm says the 10-year Treasury will test the 5% threshold in the next 6 months off the back of rising inflation expectations and concerns over U.S. fiscal spending. The call stands out against market expectations of lower yields after the Fed cut rates for the first time in 4 years last month.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Hurricane Oscar made landfall in Cuba last night, bringing powerful winds across the island, which is already experiencing an island-wide power outage. Senior hurricane specialist Brad Reinhardt.
What's going to be the biggest problem going forward is the heavy rainfall associated with Oscar. So, it could produce rainfall amounts of 6 to 12 inches with isolated amounts up to 18 inches across eastern Cuba. And so that's going to pose the potential for flash flooding and mudslides, particularly over areas of mountainous terrain.
Oscar's maximum wind speeds were 80 miles an hour when it made landfall. An investigation is underway in Georgia where a catastrophic dock collapse took place on an island south of Savannah, killing at least 7 people. Several more were injured. McIntosh County, Georgia official Kate Karwacki says that President Biden has called to offer his support.
I've personally had telephone calls from many elected officials from every sector, beginning with our president on down to fellow commissioners in our neighboring communities.
Officials say the ferry bridge was relatively new. It was built at the end of 2021, which raises a lot of questions about why it would fail so soon. A helicopter crashed into a radio tower in Houston, Texas. The pilot and 3 passengers were all killed when the chopper brought down the tower in a Houston neighborhood. Authorities and witnesses say the fiery aftermath and debris spread across 2 to 3 blocks.
The fire, everything, it was just almost like that's what I thought. The first thing I thought was the airplane.
Houston Mayor John Whitmire.
The residents are secure and safe, but we have a terrible accident scene. Multiple fatalities.
Police say a child was among the 4 killed. President Joe Biden's administration unveiled a proposal today that would require private health plans to cover over-the-counter contraception at no additional cost to consumers. With the FDA's approval of Opill, the U.S. joined more than 100 countries where birth control is already available without barriers such as doctor's appointments or parental approval. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. These Mets provided their fans with some great moments the past month, but the season ended in Los Angeles. The Dodgers won 10-5 in their 4 series wins. LA outscored the Mets 37-7. The LCS MVP was shortstop Tommy Edman, hit over 400. In Game 6, Edman had a 2-run double in the first inning, a 2-run homer in the third. Pete Alonso reflects on what the Mets still accomplished.
There's so much for us to be proud of, what we've overcame, how we became like brothers. I mean, we were just like, we accepted everyone for who they were. We came together, we gelled, we overcame so much adversity.
It'll be an interesting offseason for Alonso. He'll be a free agent. Now get ready for the Aaron Judge versus Shohei Ohtani hype. Yankees and Dodgers start the World Series Friday in L.A. Week 7 duds for the Jets and Giants in Pittsburgh. Steelers scored the last 31, beat the Jets 37-15. Russell Wilson debuted for Pittsburgh, threw for 2 touchdowns, ran for another 2 more Aaron Rodgers interceptions. That's 6 in the last 3 games. His new teammate Devontae Adams, a non-factor, and the Jets have lost 4 in a row. They're 2-5, as are the Giants, who are 0-4 at home. They've only scored 1 touchdown in 4 home games. Philadelphia, led by the ex-Giants, Saquon Barkley, won 28-3. Barkley had 176 yards, exactly 100 more than the Giants ran for. Eagles had 8 sacks. In London, Jacksonville sent the Patriots to a 6th straight loss, 32-16. The Commanders, a 40-7 rout of Carolina. The Super Bowl rematch, like the last time, a Kansas City win over the 49ers, 28-18. The Chiefs are 6-0. With Detroit's win at Minnesota, KC, the only team still undefeated. The decisive Game 5 of the WNBA Finals went to overtime. The Liberty prevailed 67-62 over Minnesota. First championship in franchise history. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports, Karen and Ethan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. Israel is honing its attack plan against Iran nearly 3 weeks after the country's massive ballistic missile strike against Israel earlier this month. The latest provocation, a Hezbollah drone attack that breached Israel's air defenses and exploded near Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home over the weekend. For the very latest, we are joined now by Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Brunner in Tel Aviv. Ethan, good morning. So what is the latest? I understand Israel has been going after Hezbollah financial institutions in its latest strikes.
That's right, Nathan. They announced late last night, our time, that they were about to start doing so and urging civilians who live near the buildings that house these Al-Qard Al-Hassan Association institutions to get out of the way. And then they began a pretty heavy bombing campaign against them. They argue that this semi-quasi bank is, in fact, the way in which Hezbollah gets its money. And in fact, the U.S. Treasury did sanction that organization 8 years ago. So there's some history there.
What does this tell us then, Ethan, about where Israel could be going now against Iran? It's been nearly 3 weeks since that ballistic missile strike, and now this concern raised with the latest potential attack coming very close to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu himself.
Yes. Well, of course, it was a Hezbollah drone, not an Iranian drone, but we all know, at least Israel says, and we accept on some level, that Iran is behind Hezbollah very heavily, both in terms of arms and money. Iran did distance itself from that attack and is trying to, in theory, calm things down. But there's no question that Israel is planning some severe counterattack against Iran. I don't think it's going to come the next day or two. We do have Amos Hochstein, the American envoy to Lebanon, in Beirut today, and we do have Tony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, due here tomorrow. So I think that there'll be some diplomatic activity for the next couple of days. And don't forget that the Americans provided the Israelis with anti-ballistic missile defense system, which is now in place in Israel. So everyone's getting ready for something, that's for sure.
Yeah. Have we seen any signs at this point, Ethan, that this latest round of diplomatic activity has had any impact on what the Israeli Security Cabinet might be planning at this point?
It's a little unclear. They had a 6 or 7 hour meeting late last night and into the morning. Not that many details have emerged. As we understand it, they discussed a bunch of things, which does tell us a little something about the potential for diplomacy. There does seem to be an appetite, I don't know that it is overwhelming in the cabinet, for some kind of more regional deal that involves the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, the situation in southern Lebanon by Hezbollah, and and the Houthis in Iran and so on. So there is some notion of some kind of a broader deal, but it's not very clear what that would mean at this point.
Does that idea of a broader deal imply that the death of Hamas leader Sinwar has had some impact, that it could potentially be that pivot point that a lot of people were talking about before this latest drone strike on Prime Minister Netanyahu's home?
Yes, I think it does. Now, that, to be fair, came on top of the killing of Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and of course those pager bombings and so on. So there was a sense in the last month, shall we say, that Israel, which had felt very much on its back foot, had gotten back on the horse and was in a position to drive the story, drive the diplomacy more in its favor. So, and then with the killing of Sinwar, I agree with you. This seems like a moment when a number of Israelis, again, not all, not those necessarily far to the right of Netanyahu, but many would like to say, take the win, let's get something going and get these hostages home. And maybe we have denatured enough of Hamas to not continue to have to go to war against it continually.
Unfortunately, Ethan, we've only got about 20 seconds left, but we heard former President Trump say he's spoken with Prime Minister Netanyahu. How is U.S. politics entering into all of this, if at all?
Look, I think it is to some extent. I mean, we probably need more than 20 seconds to really analyze that. But yeah. There's no doubt that that there would be a difference between a Trump and a Harris victory from the point of view of Israelis. But I do think both potential administrations are likely to want to not be very aggressive out here, look more domestically, and I think the Israelis are aware of that.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.